Welcome. I'm Julie Bacon, and you're listening to the Mindset Coaching for Handlers podcast, a podcast for dog handlers who are on a mission to achieve big goals. Here I share lessons, insights, personal stories, and tools you can apply during your next show, trial, or test to help you strengthen your mental game and hopefully cue more consistently. Be sure to check out the show notes where you'll find details about the episodes, plus important links, including the link to the Dogged Planner and Workbook created just for handlers on a mission. So if you're ready to improve your competitive mindset, get out of your own way, and connect with your dog like never before, then it's time to get comfy, bring an open mind, and work your mindset. Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast. All right, this week I'm going through something that happened to me, a little trigger, if you will, and how I got through it. It had to do with leading up to my national specialty, which was the other week. I'm now back, and I feel like I know what day it is now. And it went, spoiler alert, it went great. So life is good there. But this is like a few days before I was getting ready to leave for the specialty. And I was in sort of like that last minute, I'm going to call it cramming, because I think we're all guilty of cramming, whether it's how we train our dogs in those last few days before a big event or how we cram our mindsets before a big event. I've definitely had clients try to solve all their mindset challenges in like one session with me as they're cramming. But I was definitely cramming when it came to my dog's training, specifically obedience and rally, right? Because that was kind of my focus this year, in terms of training. And I was in that mode, like on and off, every day, do something, And I saw something on social media. Where else? Where else do we see things that trigger us, right? And it was this wonderful, wonderful post from a person I like and love and respect. And it was just about her fantastic weekend, right? And normally I would be all like hearts and congrats and emojis and all that, which I did because I genuinely am happy for this person. She's generally great. She deserves it, yada, yada, like all like flowers and sunshine and rainbows, like nothing negative. But in the same moment, at the same time, which remember, we can hold two things in our head, they can both be true. It also triggered me to be like, oh, shoot, am I ready for this? Like, am I ready for our national? And it was even like, is she going to be there? Can I do better than her? Like, is all my prep good enough? Have I been like working enough? Is my dog ready? Like all the things, right? All the things that we do, we spiral. So I was comparing, yes, because an exterior measurement had been stuck in the sand, if you will, right? And she didn't do it on purpose. She was celebrating her own things. It could have been anybody, by the way, right? It could have been anybody. And it wasn't like person specific. You know how some people like trigger us more than others? This wasn't that at all. It just, what she had done is by having this really great weekend, she's like stuck a flag in the ground and been like, ta-da. And I was like, I want that. Right? And that's really where my comparison was coming from. That's really where the trigger was coming from, was this, I don't know if it's jealousy or envy. I forget which one's positive, quite frankly. But like whatever the motivating one is, I was like, I want that. I want that. I want that. And it wasn't negative. I cannot stress that enough because, haters going to hate. But it was all positive. It was just the fact that I saw someone get something amazing, and it gave me that comparison feeling, yes, but it gave me also the feeling of like, I want that. Now, often, if I were to have time, like 6 months or so, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work toward that. And, 6 months from now, when I'm at this other event, like that's really my goal. And I'm going to start making, small milestones and training goals and, getting into my planner and figuring out like on, days to weeks and months, like what it is that I want to accomplish by that time. But this was a shorter time. So I was already cramming, right? So I didn't have any more, there was no more hours to cram, right? And so then what kicked in is instead of being motivating, it became like, oh my God, am I ready? Like, have I done enough? Is my dog ready? My dog hasn't worked in that many different environments. How will she do? Like, what's going to happen, right? So then the triggers then became doubt, right? It wasn't just comparison that I normally can turn into motivation because I want what she had. Like that was amazing. Like way good job, champagne cheers and all. But it was more than triggering like, ooh, but am I ready? Can I do that? Can I live up to that? And the live up to that thing was kind of arbitrary, right? She didn't say like, hey, everybody take that. See if you can do better. That wasn't the tone of the post. She was just personally celebrating. But the story I told myself out of that, and I think this is really key. That's why I'm spending so much time on it. The story I told myself was like, ooh, but can I do that? Am I ready? And so yes, doubt, but more so, it wasn't necessarily doubt as much as it was, I guess doubt's the right word, but it was just questioning my own abilities to perform. So I think this is a really important part of comparison and triggers, and especially when it comes to social media, because as I am stressing, the most positive of posts, right? The most wonderful, the most, the well-intentioned posts can still get us triggered, can still make us feel less than, even when that was not the intent of the post, okay? Because what matters in that moment are not the words on the screen. What matters in that moment is the story we tell ourselves about what those words on screen mean to us, okay? Now, thankfully, I did not layer on, what will others think or will other people compare? There were no others. It was just me and that like sort of stake in the ground of like, I want that. I want to be able to do that. Can I do that? Am I up to the challenge? Am I up to the task? Okay. So I just want to again, put it out there because comparison comes dressed in a lot of different clothes. Okay. And the thing is it doesn't take much of a trigger, or the trigger can surprise us sometimes. Like we can be surprised by what does trigger us, and it can have us doubting ourselves or putting us in a spiral. Okay. So luckily I know what to do. Okay. So, and that's probably the difference, right? I've been doing this coaching thing for a long time. I, follow my own teachings, right? I do all the things. Sometimes what I teach to you comes after learning it myself, right? So I'm in it with you, okay? So the first thing I did was I did that. I named it. I normalized it. I was like, this is what's happening. This is what you're doing. See it for what it is and remove emotion from it, right? So by naming it and by normalizing it, what I take out is the emotion, the charge that it has, right? The emotional charge that those words have. And I interrupt my loop, which is step 2, by walking around or journaling. I love physical motion. That really helps me, okay? Because it helps me physically shake it off. There's a reason those phrases exist, right? To physically shake it off, to move my body, to get out of my head, to go listen to the birds for just 10 minutes, right? Just something different that just sort of shakes me out of it. But the thing that really helps is it helps me look at the story I'm telling and separate the story that I'm telling from the reality of the words on the page, and get to this point where I am just almost reading it like a transcript, i.e. it's not me, it didn't happen to me. Even better, that this is what a client brought to me. Because when you guys come to me for coaching, it's easier for me to see what's going on, right? Because I'm not emotionally invested. So when we can get unemotionally invested or emotionally uninvested, wherever that goes, then it is easier for us to get some distance, right? So step 3 was going into coach mode. What would I say to a client? What would I say if it wasn't my story? If I wasn't the one with this emotional attachment to the moment, what would I say? And at that point, for me, again, because I have practice at that, it got very easy. It got very obvious of what I was doing. Right? It was very clear that I was making up this long story. It was very clear that I was, using my imagination for worry instead of using my imagination to visualize. right? So it was just like a shake wake up call. And honestly, as I look back at it now, of course, I'm post specialty, my national, I've been home for a minute. It's easier to see now that like I'm kind of glad it happened because I got it out of my system before the national instead of like 5 dogs out, before it was my turn to walk into the obedience ring, right? I got it. It was way out of my system. Okay. So that really needed to happen for me. And now looking back, I'm really glad it did because I would much rather process those moments before and even well before a big event than process them at the event, right? For all the obvious reasons, it's a lot harder to process in the moment than it is to be able to have the benefit of like walking around my yard or listening to birds or, journaling or any of those things that I know work for me. Okay. So then I was able to sort of recalibrate. I could go to my dogged planner and I could look and see what my process goals were and see what training times I had left and ask myself, well, what am I feeling? What specifically about my obedience am I feeling insecure about? What do I think could happen, might happen? Are they trainable? Do I need more visualization? Like, what is it that I need? Right? I think that we do a big disservice to ourselves when we don't ask what we need emotionally, right? And I think it's really telling when we just ask ourselves, well, what do you need? If you could have anything right now, what would you need? And so for me, it was like, yeah, I want to practice this a little more, or I need to visualize more, or what would make me feel better, and then I could do those things. All right. And then, the fourth step was to share it. Right? To share it with you, to not hide it, to have conversations about it, to journal it out even, because sometimes even sharing that or yelling it out in the car or whatever it is that you have to do is part of the process of like getting it out, telling someone, helping someone, venting to a friend, getting it, sorting it out. We all process in very different ways. And so however we process, but then also however we can lift someone else up, I think is, beautiful, right? So as we think about that, I want to stop there for a second. And when we come back, we're going to kind of recap that, but I've got a couple more thoughts. If you love this podcast, you'll love the Q membership. Each month, we tackle topics like ring nerves, confidence, and mental toughness, breaking them down into bite-sized, actionable lessons. You'll also get a private Facebook group for support and access to all of my online courses. It's like having a mindset coach in your pocket. Ready to get started? Join us. The link is in the show notes or head to theqcoach.com. Back to the episode. Okay, so we went through the steps that I took, and the steps were, step 1 was like name it and normalize it, right? Realize like what I was doing, realize that the fear and comparison are actually neutral. They just show that we care, just do that, right? Step 2 was to interrupt the loop, right? Because we get caught in that loop. We keep replaying it. The more we replay it is because we don't have a solution for it, right? So we've got to stop the loop in order to get the solution, which feels very counterintuitive in the emotional churn of it all, but we've got to step aside. And then of course 3 was coach myself, right? Which you all have the power to do, but to pull back and realize that like, okay, I got to get the emotion out of this. I got to see this. If it were a transcript, what are the things that I need right now? How do I need to feel better right now? What would help? What would help this situation? How can I double down on my process goals? Is there any more time for training, AKA cramming before I leave? I can definitely visualize. I can definitely journal. Like, what are the things I can do? Because when we take action, we feel more in control. And when we compare, we feel very out of control because we think that like, oh, I'm just not good enough. I'm just not that person. I'm just not there. So we need to regain our control. And then finally, the last step was sharing it, right? Whether it's sharing it with someone else or in my case, sharing it with all of you and just kind of going through it publicly. I think that's, really important. Okay. So one of the things that we need to really understand, and I think comes through in this story is understanding what our triggers are. Okay. So for me, if I'm going to get nervous at this day and age, if you will, I get nervous when I don't feel prepared. I know that that is my number one trigger. Okay. You're going to have a different trigger. We're all going to have different triggers. We're all going to have multiple triggers, by the way. But I know that my number one fastest trigger is when I don't feel prepared or that I've done enough. Okay, or that my dog is up to the challenge, right? This specific dog is young. She's not even 2 yet. So some of it is a crapshoot of how she will do, okay? So not feeling prepared makes me panic because that feels like, oh my God, I haven't done enough. Or, we don't deserve to do well because I don't feel like we've prepared enough or we haven't trained enough or I should have done one more class. I should have done one more run to Home Depot and practice in the parking lot, whatever it is, all the shoulds come up for me. That is my trigger. I'm not trying to give that trigger to you. You've got your own. But that is mine. So when a comparison post comes up like that, what I see is not that I don't see that that person is better than I am or that dog is better than I am. What I see, what I turn that into, the story I tell myself is, oh my God, I haven't prepared enough, right? Because that's my trigger. Someone else is going to see the exact same post and tell a different story to themselves, right? They're going to say like, oh my God, that dog is so much nicer. Or she's so good at obedience, I could never be that good. Or whatever, right? Whatever. We're all going to tell a different story. It's important to understand our triggers because that helps tell us what stories we go to most often, right? The story I go to in that moment is not being prepared, okay? It's not that I don't have a good enough dog, for instance, right? That's not the story I go to. So when we understand our triggers and it sounds, it sounds flip, but like we almost befriend our triggers, then we recognize them easier, sooner, faster, and we can turn them around easier, sooner, faster, right? That's why for me, this was a very short timed moment, right? I'm not saying minutes. It was, probably a couple hours, but I was able to get myself back quickly because when I saw it, the trigger was familiar. My feelings were familiar. The story I was telling myself was familiar. And I could say, no, we're not going down this road. What is it that I need to do? What would help the situation? What would make me feel more prepared? What else could I do? What else is within my control to do to put me in a position I want to be in at my national? Okay. And so it turns out that for me, one of the things I could do was visualize more. Because I looked at it and I said, you know what? I have trained quite a bit for this. I have trained, more than I usually would for this type of a class. We are prepared, but also I know that the variable is her age and her lack of environmental experience. She just hasn't been that many places. And I knew that the obedience was going to be in a ballroom, right? Really different environment. Okay. So I did what I knew would help me and I knew would help me stop telling that story over and over again and would get me on a much better, more constructive mental path. Okay. And for those of you who are wondering, we did well in obedience, but we did not do as well as I had hoped. And what was very interesting for me, and again in this story, is because I'd done the mental prep, I was good nervous. And I say that because if you've been listening for a long time, you know that I like a certain amount of nerves. Because it helps me with focus, right? You are nervous, remember, because you care. If I'm not nervous at all, it means I don't care. And I want to care, especially in my national specialty. I want to care. I want to put in a good performance. And I felt like I also wanted to be able to show to myself, most importantly, that the work we had put in had paid off. And immediately when we went into the ring, I knew I didn't have my whole dog. She was distracted. She was overwhelmed. If I could have looked her in the eyes, her eyes probably would have been as big as saucers. She's a baby dog still. She'll be 2, not for a few months. And I didn't get my initial hop right at the start. She would do it and then she would look around and I was like, oh, we're in for it. But what was good about that moment, and it was it was like seconds, is that I knew okay, this is not our 200 day, right? As if, but anyway, this isn't our 200 day. So now I have to support my dog. Now I have to give her a good experience and do the best we can do. And that's what we did. And we ended up with a decent, not a great score, and a 4th place out of 57 dogs, which is nothing to shake at. And I did have a chance to watch the winner of that class, who ended up being the high-end trial, and it was gorgeous. It was someone I didn't know. It wasn't the same person in the post, but it was gorgeous. And if it couldn't be me, then I was so glad it was that person, because it was lovely. It was the best run I saw that day, and obviously it was the best run of the weekend or the day. And it was fine. But having gone through it beforehand allowed me in the moment to say oh, this is not, the dream that I had is not possible. How am I going to switch gears and be the support that my dog needs right now? And how can I make sure this is a good experience and just do the best we can? And we did that. And without all the training and the preparation I did put in, we probably wouldn't have done that well, right? Because she was really nervous and looking around and was like, oh my God, where are you? Where are we? Kind of a thing. Okay. So just FYI, in case you wanted to know exactly the details of how we did. So think about that, this whole story. I'm sure you have a version of your own that is maybe even deadly similar, or you have different triggers or what have you. But think about taking those steps, parsing it out, getting the emotion out of the way, almost like writing it down so that you can see it as a transcript instead of living it in your emotions, right? Because when we separate out those emotions, we're sort of able to see it more clearly, and our rational thought helps get us out of that spiral, okay? So that's your homework if you are unfortunately triggered. But regardless, even on good days when you're not triggered, think about those things that trigger you so that you can be prepared, as I was, when those things inevitably come up, right? They're not going to come up every day, but if you know that X is a trigger, it's going to come up again. So think it through now when it's easy and there's not that emotional charge. Okay? All right. Whatever you're doing this week, I hope you have a fantastic week with your dogs. Thanks so much for listening to the Mindset Coaching for Handlers podcast with me, Julie Bacon. I am so grateful for your precious time. Check out my Dogged Planner workbook and journal available on Amazon. Just search for Dogged Planner. I also offer monthly membership that's perfect for ongoing support of your awesome goals. Check out theqcoach.com for details, or just stop by and check out all the ways you can work on your mindset. And be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at theqcoach and let me know how it's going. Finally, please share, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps us podcasters tremendously. Plus, I know I get my best podcast recommendations from friends. Thanks, and have a great week with your dogs.